The sound of the heart monitor was the only thing still marking time in room 208. Outside, the world kept moving, cars passing by, voices echoing through hallways, notifications buzzing on phones. But inside that sterile rectangle of silence, John's life felt like it was unraveling in slow motion. 68 years old, 32 spent in ministry, 29 beside Martha, and now alone. No Martha, no church, no faith. Just a tired body connected to machines that seemed to be fighting harder than he was. There's nothing more we can do. Those were the doctor's words that morning. Short, clear, precise. We can continue with palliative care, but you have the right to stop everything whenever you choose. John nodded silently, but inside, something collapsed. There was a letter on the nightstand. One he had started months ago, back when he still believed prayer could change something. It was meant for God, but he never finished it. Lord, if you're still there, ... And then, a coffee stain. The pen ran out. Or maybe he did. Night. John made up his mind. He wouldn't call the kids. Wouldn't ask for more tests. When the sun rose, he'd ask them to stop the medications. That would be the end. Or at least, it should have been. The nurse entered quietly. She simply adjusted the sheet and looked at him with that look, the kind that says more than any words ever could. A look that had learned to coexist with daily goodbyes. Before she left, she whispered, "I'll pray for you." John didn't answer. He just turned his face away. The last time someone prayed for him, Martha was still alive. Now, even God seemed silent as he closed his eyes, searching for artificial sleep. He heard a distant sound. It wasn't coming from the hallway. It wasn't the medical staff. It was a voice, soft, gentle, childlike. "God, I know Grandpa is sick, but you can make him better. Like that day, you healed the man in the Bible. Can you do it again? Please." John thought he was dreaming, but the voice came again, sweet, with a faith so pure it almost pierced him. "I trust you, Lord. Even if no one else can help, I know you can." That prayer wasn't for him. It was for someone in the next room. A grandfather, another patient, but for some reason, he couldn't stop listening. The girl's words were simple, but they rang like church bells inside his chest. And then she said, "And help that man who's all alone. The one who lives on the other side of the wall." John froze. How did she know? In the darkness of the room, with tears trying not to fall, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Presence, but no one expected what would happen next. The next morning, the light slipping through the curtain felt a little less gray, but John hadn't slept. He had spent the night in silence, trying to understand what he had heard. The girl's voice wouldn't leave him. It was as if every word she spoke was still floating in the hospital air, vibrating between the cold tiles and the tangled cords. There was something in that prayer that bypassed the lungs and went straight to the soul. He quietly asked the nurse who was in the room next door. She said it was Mr. Gregory, an elderly man with severe heart failure, accompanied by his granddaughter while the parents were at work. John just nodded, asked no more questions. But something inside him burned. At 3 p.m. he heard it again. This time, more clearly, the girl had returned and began praying the moment she arrived. Her grandfather was asleep, but she prayed anyway, sitting on a plastic chair with her little legs swinging in the air. And then she started talking to God again, but this time, with different words. Words that didn't seem to come from a child. "Lord, you are my shelter. You hide me in your secret place. Evil can't reach me when I'm with you." John sat up in bed. Those words, he didn't know them. He tried to remember if they were from an old hymn, a scripture he once preached. No, they weren't in his memory. And yet, something in him recognized them. The girl continued, "When I'm afraid, I run to you, because you cover me with your wings." He closed his eyes, but not to escape this time. He closed them to feel. Was this just a prayer? Or was it something more deep inside? A question rose. How could a child have more intimacy with God than a man who had preached his whole life? John remembered a phrase he once said from the pulpit years ago, with pride. The faith of the little ones teaches more than the sermons of the mighty. Back then, it was just a catchy line. Now, it was a mirror. That night, John didn't turn off the TV. He didn't ask for sleeping pills. He just listened, waiting. And then she came back. At the end of the day, before leaving, the girl opened a small blue-covered book. It looked like a children's Bible, and she read from it like someone reciting something sacred. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid?" John felt the hair on his arms rise. She continued, "Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear." That voice, it was no longer just sweet. It carried authority, certainty. But what struck him most was that it felt like those words were meant for him. He didn't know if it was the girl's tone, the way she paused at just the right phrases, or maybe just his own desperation grasping for anything at all. But those words were healing him. The next morning, John called the hospital chaplain. He asked to borrow a Bible. When the chaplain brought him a worn, now black-covered copy, John simply asked, "Which psalm says, 'The Lord is my light and my salvation'?" The chaplain smiled. "Psalm 27, one of my favorites." John didn't respond, but he held that Bible the way someone holds a map back home. But what that psalm said was only the beginning. That very afternoon, John asked the nurse to leave the door slightly open. He didn't want to seem nosy, but he couldn't keep listening from a distance. He needed to see. He needed to understand who this child was, and what she carried that made his soul tremble like that. Around 4 o'clock, she appeared. She wore a pink hoodie with a bunny on the chest. In her hands, a cup with a lid and a small shoulder bag. She walked lightly, yet with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. She entered her grandfather's room as if it were a second home. She sat in the armchair, pulled the blue Bible from her bag, and began reading silently to herself. John, on the other side of the wall, closed his eyes, but not to sleep. He closed them because suddenly, listening felt more important than seeing. She read quietly, but now and then, she paused to talk to God, as if explaining what she had just understood. And then came the part that pierced him. I know you're not just here at the hospital, but if you are here right now, touch Grandpa, and if there's someone else who needs it, touch them too. John felt a sharp pull in his chest. That sentence was like an invisible note left just for him. The next day, when the chaplain passed by the room, John couldn't resist. Can I ask you something? He said, holding the Bible. That little girl next door, how old is she? 7. Her name is Grace, he repeated, almost in a whisper. And what is she reading? Sounds like a psalm I've never heard before. The chaplain gave a soft smile. She reads Psalm 27 almost every day. I gave her that psalm when her grandfather was admitted. Told her it was her shield. John closed his eyes for a moment. Shield. Later that afternoon, he asked the nurse to take him to the hospital chapel. Still weak, he was pushed in a wheelchair to a small space on the ground floor, decorated with a simple wooden cross and frosted windows that let in soft light. There, he opened the Bible and reread Psalm 27 from beginning to end, slowly, verse by verse, word by word, like someone savoring something for the first time. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? For a moment, he forgot the machines, forgot the scans, forgot even the unfinished letter. In that moment, all that existed was the quiet voice inside saying, there's still faith in here. It was just asleep. And when he finished reading, he noticed something unusual. The Bible he held was identical to the girl's. Blue cover, large print, a red ribbon bookmark between the pages. The bookmark was placed exactly at Psalm 27. He smiled for the first time. In weeks, a small smile, but a real one. That night, returning to his room, he found a surprise on his meal tray. It was a child's drawing, a stick figure with a heart in the center and a sentence written in pink marker. For you who are sad, God hasn't forgotten to love you. John couldn't hold it back. He cried. But not from pain. He cried because he had found something he thought was lost. Not the faith of the mighty, but the faith that rises from below. From the ground, from childhood, from those who still believe without needing to see. And it was in that moment that he began to understand the miracle isn't when God changes everything. The miracle is when God changes us. But what that little girl would do next, no one was prepared to see. The next morning, John woke before the shift changed. The first thing he did was reach for the Bible on the table. It now stayed there like an extension of his own body, a physical reminder that there was still something left to discover, something to feel. He turned again to Psalm 27, and this time, he didn't just read it, he spoke to it. With every verse, a memory returned. With every line, a piece of himself was touched. The Lord is the strength of my life. Whom shall I fear? Everything, Lord. But now, a little less. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Cancer encamped, so did loneliness. But you, one thing I have asked of the Lord, that I may dwell in his house all the days of my life. Even if my house now is this room, could you visit me here? The words were no longer just beautiful, they were a mirror. John saw himself in them, his flaws, his losses, his emptiness, but also something else, a breath of return. It was as if the voice he thought had gone, silent, was still there, faint but alive. At the end of the psalm, his eyes stopped at a verse that seemed to shine above the rest. Wait on the Lord, be strong, and he shall strengthen your heart. He read it again. Then, like a prayer, he whispered it out loud. Wait on the Lord, be strong, he will strengthen my heart. In that moment, he felt a tightness in his chest, but it wasn't pain. It felt more like longing, not for someone else, but for himself, for the man who used to believe so much. Then, like a child, he had an impulse to write. He grabbed a medical notepad the nurse kept on the side shelf and began writing a letter. This time, not to God, but to whoever came after him. If you're reading this, it means you're in a room like mine, and maybe you feel like I did, forgotten, tired, ready to give up. But don't close your eyes yet. Read this psalm. Read it like it was written just for you, because maybe it was. He folded the paper. On the front, he wrote, to whoever comes after me later. He called the chaplain and made a simple request that carried deep weight. Can I leave this letter here when I leave? Of course, Mr. John. Absolutely. It's not a farewell. It's a reminder. That evening, a nurse entered the room with a warm smile. You've got a special visitor. I think you'll like this. It was Grace. This time, alone. Her mom waited outside. John smiled when he saw her. You're different. You know that? She shrugged shyly. It's because I believe. John held up the Bible. That psalm you pray. Does it speak to you? She nodded. It speaks to my heart. Sometimes with tears, sometimes with silence. But it always speaks. He swallowed hard. It spoke to me too. After years, after everything, Grace smiled, her eyes lighting up. That's because Psalm 27 has something hidden in it. John raised an eyebrow. And what's that? She answered softly. It doesn't talk about healing. It talks about courage. And sometimes, courage is the greatest healing. Her words hung in the air like incense. Slowly, John handed her the letter. Can you promise me something? I can. If you ever meet someone who's sad, give them this. And tell them it's from a man who learned to wait again. She nodded, then held his hand. I asked God to help Grandpa, but I also asked him not to let you be alone. John chuckled gently. He heard because of you. He heard she hugged him, a small hug, with short arms, but it reached far deeper than the skin. In that embrace, John realized it wasn't the psalm speaking to him. It was God, using a child's faith as a megaphone from heaven. But what came next would change everything again. 2 days later, the medical team entered Gregory's room with more alert expressions. The head nurse had noticed something strange in the daily tests. His blood pressure had stabilized, his heartbeat was less irregular, and surprisingly, he was starting to respond more strongly to stimuli. The attending doctor ordered more tests. Some of the results came in later that afternoon. The condition was no longer the same. Gregory wasn't healed, but something was happening that medicine couldn't explain with data. He was responding, as if his body had received a second wind, as if someone had breathed life into him. The team called the family in for a meeting. Grace's mother grew emotional. The little girl just smiled and said, with the confidence of someone who knows exactly what she's doing, I told God. I asked him the right way. John heard everything from the hallway. He was sitting in a wheelchair, pretending to read a magazine. But the truth was, he was waiting for the right moment, waiting for a chance to say thank you. When Grace walked out of the room holding her mother's hand, John gave her a shy wave. Hey, young lady. She ran to him with excitement. Hi, do you remember what you told me? About the psalm? Being about courage? I do. Well, you were right, and I wanted to thank you. She giggled. I only pray. God is the one who does it. John took her little hand in his. But your prayer got there first. It reached where nothing else could. The girl glanced down the hallway, then whispered, I didn't just pray for Grandpa. At one point, I felt in my heart that someone else needed it more than him, so I prayed for them too. John bit his lip. He couldn't speak. You know what's funny? She added. I didn't know your name, so I just said, God, you know who it is? He closed his eyes. How many times had he said that exact phrase from the pulpit? How often had he told others to believe that God knew their names even when the world forgot them? And now, he was that nameless man, the one remembered by a 7-year-old girl. Grace, he said, his voice trembling, do you believe miracles are real? I do, but sometimes the miracle isn't when someone gets better, it's when someone starts believing again. John took a deep breath. Then maybe, I'm the miracle you prayed for. She beamed with a wide smile. Amen. The next day, John got a visit from the doctor. He reviewed the tests, looked at the chart, then at the patient. You're no longer in critical condition, Mr. John. We still have a long way to go, but your body is fighting back. And honestly, I can't explain it. John smiled. Maybe you don't need to, doctor. Word spread quickly among the hospital staff. The man in room 208 was getting better. Nurses whispered among themselves. Some said it was psychological, others, just luck. But a janitor, walking past the corridor, said softly, it was prayer. No doubt, I saw that little girl, and I felt it. 2 days later, John asked to write a letter, but this time, it wasn't to be left behind in the room. It was meant for Grace. On the page, he wrote, the day you prayed for me was the day I chose to live again. Medicine treated my body, but your faith healed my soul. On the envelope, he drew a heart and wrote, to the girl who prayed before she knew my name. At the end of the week, Gregory was discharged too. Grace and her family said their goodbyes to the staff. But before they left, Grace's mother asked if they could stop by room 208. John was sitting by the window, looking out at the view. John, she knocked gently on the door. There's someone here who wants to see you. Grace ran in. I came to say goodbye, but just for now. Someday we'll see each other again. John smiled. I hope so. And when we do, I want to tell you the rest of my story. She raised an eyebrow. There's more, he chuckled. Always. Because with God, we never know what the end really is. But the biggest twist was still to come. On Monday morning, John was cleared to walk to the hospital's inner garden. It was a small space, tucked between the buildings, with a few young trees, wooden benches, and a water fountain that looked forgotten. He walked slowly, but without support. The sunlight touched his shoulders gently, and the air smelled like damp leaves and quiet. Hope dot in his hand. He carried something simple but full of meaning. The letter Grace had left for another patient, written by him, but meant for whoever came next. The phrase on the front still made his chest tighten. To whoever comes after me. During those days he had thought a lot about what it truly meant to leave. Maybe dying wasn't about leaving the world, but leaving something behind, something that could reach the next person, something that could be a bridge between yesterday's pain and tomorrow's miracle. Back in his room, he placed the folded letter inside the bedside drawer. He took a deep breath and prayed, not with eloquent words, not with the pulpit voice, but with the raw simplicity of someone who, for the first time in a long time, felt truly heard. God, I don't know how to pray like before. I don't even know what to expect anymore. But if you're still listening, stay here, even if it's just in silence. Stay with me. Silence. No goosebumps, no response. But something in him had shifted. Silence was no longer absence. It was quiet presence. 2 days later, he was discharged. The medical team gave him instructions, prescriptions, follow-up appointments, but no one knew that what he left behind was worth more than any medical report. That same day, a new patient arrived in room 208. Her name was Meredith, a widow, 65 years old, diagnosed with aggressive lymphoma. She looked tired, refused visits, barely spoke. When she walked in, she dropped her purse onto the chair and stared blankly at the white wall. When she opened the drawer to store her belongings, she found the envelope. Curious, she read the phrase on the front, thought about tossing it away, but something stopped her. She sat on the bed and began to read. If you're reading this, it means you're in a room like mine, ... She read it all the way through, slowly, pausing now and then to wipe away her tears. When she finished, she pressed the paper against her chest and whispered, "Who are you? And how did you know exactly what I'm feeling?" At the end of the letter was the psalm, handwritten, every verse of Psalm 27 carefully copied, like a gift. Meredith read it aloud, stopping only to breathe between each line. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The words came out trembling, but alive. And when she finished, she murmured, "I haven't prayed in years, but maybe this is the beginning." That same night, she called the son she hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "You don't need to say anything, just listen. I think I've been found again." Meanwhile, the nurse who had cared for John during his stay found an old envelope in the recycling bin. It was torn, but readable. It was the original letter John had started writing to God, and never finished. The unfinished sentence was still there. "Lord, if you're still there, ... She picked up a pen, and without knowing why, finished it. "Thank you for staying." The next night, John arrived home. The house was the same, but he wasn't. He sat in the old reading chair, looked at the unlit fireplace, and opened a notebook. He wrote a new letter. This time, not to be hidden in drawers or left behind in a hospital. This one was meant to be read, to be shared. If this story found you, it means God is still speaking. Even if you think you don't know how to pray, even if you believe He won't listen, believe this. He's listening even before you speak a word, because sometimes He hears even the silence. At the bottom, he wrote the same verse that had saved his faith. Psalm 27-14, "Wait on the Lord. Be of good courage, and He shall strengthen your heart." Then, he looked into his phone camera and recorded his voice. Gentle, steady, alive. If you know someone who needs to hear this, send it to them now. And if that someone is you, leave just one word in the comments. Courage, because faith can come from anywhere, even from a child who prays for someone she doesn't even know. If you've made it this far, maybe it was by chance, or maybe, just maybe, chance is what we call it when God moves in silence. Maybe someone sent you this video. Maybe you're watching in the middle of the night, in a hospital room, at home, alone, or at a moment when no one else seems to understand what you're going through. But God understands. And now, I want to invite you to pray. It doesn't matter if you think you don't know how. It doesn't matter if you're weak, tired, unsure, or afraid. The prayer that transforms is the one spoken in truth. So close your eyes or just take a deep breath and pray with me now. Lord, you are my light. You are my salvation. Even if everything collapses around me, even if fear visits me in the morning and anguish finds me at night, I choose to trust because you are with me. Even if an army rises against me, my heart will not be overcome. Strengthen my soul, touch my body, restore my faith. And if it is your will, let the miracle begin now. Amen. Months had passed since John left the hospital. Life had changed. He walked slower now, but with strength. Every morning, he would sit on the porch with a cup of tea and the same Bible, the black one he got from the chaplain. Sometimes he opened it to Psalm 27. Other times, he just held it and let the silence speak. One Sunday afternoon, scrolling through the internet, he clicked, maybe by accident, or maybe not, on a live stream from a small church service in rural North Carolina. The camera was simple, the audio basic, but the voice that started reading froze him in place. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" It was a woman's voice, steady, gratefully calm. John recognized it instantly. It was Meredith. That she was reading Psalm 27 before the congregation. Behind her, a small wooden pulpit and a cross lit by candles. The church was full, and she continued, "Though an army encamps against me, my heart shall not fear." John stood up from his chair, moved closer to the screen, eyes filling with tears. Meredith finished the reading with a gentle smile. And before walking away from the microphone, she said, "This psalm found me in a hospital. In a letter left by someone I've never met. It said, if you're reading this, it means God is still speaking." The church went silent. Then she concluded, "If the man who wrote that letter is watching, I just want to say, your prayer saved me." John brought his hands to his face, and there, in that quiet living room, he wept again. But this time, with relief. The psalm that had lifted him up had returned, in someone else's voice. And in that moment, he understood. Some miracles don't happen to us, they happen through us. And maybe that was his greatest healing. If this prayer touched your heart, write the name of someone you love in the comments below, someone who needs healing, comfort, or hope. Share this video with them, and leave one word, just one, courage, because sometimes the miracle begins with the kind of faith that can only say, "God, stay with me."